Part 5 refers to Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, which deals with heritage conservation districts, which in this presentation you'll see abbreviated to HCDs. Hopefully as we go through this, wherever I have an acronym, I'll explain it the first time as we go through. Okay, and Heather has given you a brief introduction to the experience I've had. The 4 HCDs that I was involved with in the City of Toronto, 2 were done with the assistance of consultants and 2 were done with staff that I was working with. I've also drafted another HCD for the City of Toronto and done an HCD study, again, in another area of Toronto. And I served on the Municipal Heritage Committee in Newmarket for 20 years, during which we attempted to establish an HCD in the Main Street area, and that was successfully accomplished just a couple years ago. Okay, an outline of my presentation is shown on the screen. I'll start with a brief overview of what heritage conservation districts are. Then we'll go through why you would designate an area and what is a Part 5 designation, the format of a heritage conservation district designation bylaw. Number 5, what areas can be designated as heritage conservation districts. 6, the heritage conservation district study and plan. 7, the effect of heritage conservation district designation. 8, the process for district designation. 9, an advisory committee, whether you should have one or not. And 10, heritage conservation districts versus zoning bylaw, because that's frequently a question that's asked. Why do we need a heritage conservation district when we've got a zoning bylaw? And I'm just thinking about the presentation, and I had cataract surgery on Tuesday, so number 9 will simply be a verbal discussion because I forgot to do the slide for that. But anyhow, let's move on. Okay, the overview of a heritage conservation district. It's a tool that's established by municipal bylaw to manage exterior physical change in an area that's designated by that bylaw, that is a concentration of properties of cultural heritage value. So we're managing change so as to maintain and enhance the area's heritage character. One important point, and you'll get this if you go out to the public to try and establish it, if you bring in an HCD, it means we're going to freeze everything. No, it doesn't. It manages change, so change can happen. Another important point is the Heritage Conservation District doesn't apply to the uses that occur on that property. So whether you use the buildings for residential, commercial use is not something that is managed by a Heritage Conservation District bylaw, rather the zoning bylaw. A Heritage Conservation District applies to both private and public properties. So it's the whole community within the area that is defined by the municipality. And as we'll discuss later, even the municipality is obligated to follow its own designation bylaw. Finally, a Heritage Conservation District doesn't deal with the interiors of buildings, it's strictly exteriors. So why would you designate an area? The first and probably the most important point is it's to protect an area where there's a concentration of heritage properties. It includes all properties within that area. So although there's a concentration of heritage properties, some of the properties within the area designated may not be heritage, but they are included and managed by that designation bylaw. So it includes all properties, and it includes all streets and other public properties within that area. So you want to protect that area. The next important point is to ensure that new development fits in to the heritage character of that area. As mentioned, an HCD can include non-heritage properties, and it provides guidelines and a plan for new development within that area. Additional reasons as to why you might want to designate an area include, as with a Part 4 designation, preventing demolition by neglect, and that would have to be combined with a heritage property standards bylaw. Preventing inappropriate exterior alterations. So again, I emphasize it's just the exterior of buildings on properties that we're dealing with. If your municipality has a heritage grant or property tax reduction program, properties that are within a Part 5 designation, a Heritage Conservation District, can be eligible for those grants and property tax reduction. It can be used to provide relief under the building code, but only for the exteriors of buildings within the Heritage Conservation District. It provides recognition of the area as an important heritage area, and it can come from a request from the community. And here I emphasize quite strongly that because it applies to a larger area, it applies to all properties, that there should be more than just a historical group, a historical society, or another interest group. There should be more than that involved in making a request. Okay, why would a group of property owners want a Heritage Conservation District for their area? And this is something, if you're attempting to convince a community that they should have one, this is an important point, and one that many communities have grabbed onto and run with. And the point is that it's the most powerful municipal tool for maintaining the physical character of a neighborhood. So it's the physical, the built form and landscape character of the area, most powerful tool. It's stronger and more comprehensive than a zoning bylaw. So many communities have realized this, and I know in the City of Toronto there was, with this knowledge, there was a very strong grassroots movement to get more heritage conservation districts. So what is Part 5 designation? It's a bylaw authorized under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, passed by Municipal Council and registered on title to area properties. So it's on the title to all area properties. So this arises from the Ontario Heritage Act, Section 41(1), which reads, where there is in effect in a municipality and an official plan that contains provisions related to the establishment of Heritage Conservation District, the Council of a municipality may by bylaw designate the municipality or any defined area or areas thereof as a Heritage Conservation District. So there's a precondition to establishing a Heritage Conservation District, and that's an official plan policy. So as an example of an official plan policy, and it can be a very general policy, I looked at, and this is typical of many municipalities, Collingwood's official plan. So if you go to policy 7.2.2, section 2 of their official plan, it states, areas or neighborhoods may exist within the town of Collingwood that warrant preservation due to their heritage value. Council may, in consultation with the Collingwood Heritage Committee, pursue the designation of such areas as Heritage Conservation Districts under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. That's it. That's all you need, but you do need such a policy in your OP to start establishing Heritage Conservation Districts. Okay, let's take a look at a Part 5 designation bylaw. And the example that I'm dealing with here is for the Cabbagetown South area. It was one that I was involved with in the City of Toronto, and it's bylaw 887-2005. And I've given a website where you can take a look at the bylaw, although all of it is reproduced here because it's not very long. So the first section of the bylaw starts with the whereases. And so the first whereas, they authorize the passing of a bylaw under Section 40 to study the area as a Heritage Conservation District. So that's the first whereas. The second whereas is that they defined the study area. That was done at exactly the same time. And then the third whereas is a heritage study of the area has been conducted. So those are the whereases. Now therefore the Council hereby enacts as follows. The area outlined in the heavy line shown on the map as Schedule A is the Heritage Conservation District as per Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I'll show you the map in the next slide. So they've defined it by a map. The Heritage Conservation District Plan for Cabbagetown South, prepared by the City of Toronto, is adopted. So Council has adopted a plan for that area. And then there is a heritage character statement, and the district plan is available. So people can look at it on the website, and you certainly can take a look at it on the website. And with the map that you see in this slide, that's the extent of a Heritage Conservation District designation bylaw. Pretty simple, but there's a lot of work and a lot of documentation in behind the bylaw that is not part of the bylaw. So as you can see in this Heritage Conservation District in Cabbagetown South, there are a lot of properties involved. It extends from just east of Parliament Street and north of Carlton over to the Don Valley Parkway. So a lot of properties, and in fact this was the third Heritage Conservation District in Cabbagetown. We started out with an area just to the north called Cabbagetown Metcalf, and we decided let's take a small area where we know the community is strongly in favor of this Heritage Conservation District, and let's see what the outcome of that is. So we did a Heritage Conservation District there. It was successfully passed by Council. There was one appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board, and that was somebody didn't like the name Cabbagetown. But other than that, the plan was passed. The board approved the plan and the designation bylaw, and the community started to operate with that Heritage Conservation District plan in place. We then decided to do Cabbagetown North, Cabbagetown South, and we've done, since I've left the city, there's also been a Cabbagetown West. And when we came out to Cabbagetown South with our plan, the reaction from the community was, why haven't we been designated yet? So this was a process that we worked with in a small area, showed the community that it can work, that it did preserve the physical character of the community, and it became something that the rest of the community grabbed onto. So what areas can be designated as Heritage Conservation Districts? You saw with Part 4 designations that there was a regulation that set out the criteria for determining what properties can be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Unlike Part 4, Part 5 does not have a provincial regulation specifying areas that can be designated as Heritage Conservation Districts. Some municipalities have attempted to use the regulation for Part 4 and apply it to areas as a whole, and said that an HCD must exhibit one or more of the following criteria. And the criteria are grouped into design or physical value, historical or associative value, or contextual value. So they've done that informally. Some municipalities have specified in their official plans what areas can be designated as heritage conservation districts. So this is something you should follow up. Does your municipality in its official plan set out the criteria? If it doesn't, then there are no set criteria. It's something that would be developed as you study the area. But let's take a look at Burlington's. And there in policy 8.3.4 of their official plan, it refers to cultural heritage landscapes may be conserved through designation as heritage conservation districts. So a cultural heritage landscape is a grouping of properties that may or may not have buildings on it. It could have buildings. It could be strictly landscape features. And the criteria they've used are where some or all of the following features have been identified. The first one deals with buildings that reflect an aspect of local history by nature of location and historical significance of setting. The next one refers to architectural style or method of construction. The third one deals with other important physical, environmental, or aesthetic features that are not sufficient for an individual designation, but lend support for evaluating the criteria for designation. So it's a grouping of properties that have physical, environmental, or aesthetic features that are important to the community. And then the last one is the district is an area of special association that is distinctive within the city and as a result adds to the character of the entire community. So many of the criteria that are being developed by municipalities for heritage conservation districts don't make reference to a specific date or specific architectural style. Let's take a look at some of the districts that have been designated. And more than 100 have been designated and approved and are in operation in Ontario, covering more than 15,000 properties. And some examples, Toronto, the South Rosedale area. It's a residential area, a very exclusive residential area with hundreds of properties within the area. And then another one in Toronto is Draper Street. And it's one street extending from, it's one block face on either side of the street. And it's an area that's sandwiched between industrial and commercial development on either side. And this was one area that the community thought was worth saving. So it can be a street, it can be many streets, it can be very exclusive areas. And interestingly enough, South Rosedale was one of the communities that decided they wanted something to preserve the physical character of their area, and they paid for the study to do this. So it was something that was a community initiative, and it was quite interesting. I had one of the richest men in Canada when he was alive, Ken Thompson, phoned me up and asked me about this heritage conservation appeal designation with it. It can be wealthy, it can be very neighborhood. So there's no basis for exclusion there. It can be commercial. So you've seen residential, Port Hope. Their Main Street commercial area is a heritage conservation district. In Kingston, the Market Square, which is a mixture of commercial and institutional areas, including the City Hall and the Market Square in behind the City Hall, is a Heritage Conservation District. In Kitchener, the St. Mary's Heritage, an area of World War II housing. And it's not something that some people may think is architecturally glamorous, but it met the criteria. It was an unusual area. There was certainly a design theme to the area. It represented a particular point in the development of that community immediately after World War II. And when the consultants went out to do the district for this area, the response from the residents, part of the response was, we didn't think anybody was really interested in our community. That's a Heritage Conservation District. In contrast, in the City of Toronto, the Union Station area is a Heritage Conservation District, and it includes not only the Union Station itself, which is a 20th century structure, but the buildings across the street from it, including the Roy York Hotel and some rather modern structures, such as the headquarters for the Royal Bank. So it can include institutional and large commercial areas, and it can include modern structures. So that's the type of Heritage Conservation Districts that have been established. Some of the types have been established in Ontario. Let's take a look at a Heritage Conservation District study. And with changes to the Ontario Heritage Act in 2005, a clause was set out in the Heritage Act, Clause 40, Sub 1, that states the Council of a municipality may undertake a study for the purposes of designating one or more Heritage Conservation Districts. So this is not a mandatory requirement. It's permissive, but it does set out the scope of the study. So under Section 2 of Clause 40 of the Ontario Heritage Act, it says that the study shall, so this is now a requirement of a study that is permissive, but it's now a requirement that it has to examine the character, the study has to examine the character and appearance of the area. It has to examine and make recommendations on the geographic boundaries of the area to be designated. It has to consider and make recommendations as to the objectives of the designation and the content of a Heritage Conservation District plan required under Section 41.1. So although the study isn't required, the Heritage Conservation District plan is a mandatory requirement now. And the final item that a study has to consider is to make recommendations on any changes that will be required to the municipality's official plan or other bylaws, including the zoning bylaw. So there's the scope of a Heritage Conservation District study. And as mentioned, the municipality may designate a Heritage Conservation Study area by bylaw. And under the Heritage Act, it may prohibit or set out limitations on alterations, demolitions, and new buildings for up to a year within an area that they've established as a Heritage Conservation District study area. And it's subject to an Ontario Municipal Board appeal. My recommendation is that you don't establish a Heritage Conservation District study area by bylaw and implement the limitations on alterations, because you could open yourself up to an Ontario Municipal Board hearing and have to deal with that before you've even done the study, before you've even prepared the plan. The ones that I've worked with in the City of Toronto, the council simply said, this is a study area that that staff may look at for a potential heritage conservation district study. Now, if the area is under immediate threat, certainly take advantage of this. But as I say, if you do take advantage of it, you could have an OMB hearing even before you start doing the study. So we've looked at what the Ontario Heritage Act says about an HCD study. Let's see what it says about an HCD plan. And keep in mind that when you do a Heritage Conservation District, the Heritage Act requires that you have an HCD plan. And the plan shall include, so it's not only mandatory that you have a plan, but you have to include these things. A statement of objectives to achieve in designating the area, a statement explaining the cultural heritage value or interest of the area, a description of the heritage attributes of the Heritage Conservation District and of properties in that area, policy statements, guidelines, and procedures for achieving the stated objectives and managing change in the HCD. And lastly, item E, a description of the alterations or classes of alterations that are minor and that don't require a heritage permit. So your plan has to deal with those issues. So although a Heritage Conservation District study is not mandatory, I do strongly recommend that you do it because it provides the basis for the plan. It provides background information that will assist you in defending the plan, and it will include an inventory, or it should include an inventory and description of all properties within the HCD. Now the study and plan can be combined, so you can do both of them at the same time. And the example that I'm going to look at here is one that I did for the Munro Park East Beach area in the City of Toronto, and the website is listed there. And I think it's useful to do the study and the plan at the same time, because as you're doing the study, you're thinking about, okay, what I'm finding in the study, what sort of policy should I have to deal with what I am finding in the study? So it helps to be thinking of both of those things at the same time. So the Munro Park East Beach area, it's an area south of Queen Street in the City of Toronto. If you're familiar with the City of Toronto, it's just west of the R.C. Harris filtration plant. And it was an amusement park up until around 1905. The whole area was an amusement park at the end of a streetcar line. And the amusement park was sold off to developers, and it was subdivided, and the area was developed, as you'll see in the map on the right-hand side, over a period from about 1910 to 1924. So this is a map that came out of the study that shows the period when the buildings in those areas were built. And of course you'll see a few that were built after that that don't have any coloring on them. That means they were built after 1924. But most of them were built in that period of time. So the study examined the history and the evolution of the area. It examined the built features. What are the attributes? There you see part of a streetscape for Neville Park within this Heritage Conservation District. And the attributes that it looked at of the built features were the massing, the height, the setback, the predominant building material, the presence of verandas, and you can see in the picture almost every house in the district had a veranda on it, the roof shape, the windows and doors, these are exterior windows and doors, because keep in mind you can only deal with the exterior buildings in the Heritage Conservation District, decorative treatments, accessory buildings such as garages, and then architectural styles. So in doing that study, we looked at all of those items, and many of them were mapped out, so you could see, you know, the height of buildings. They were at the most 2.5 stories, usually 2 stories and less. There was a consistent setback. So you start to see, as you go through the study area, some of the characteristics and some of the important features that should be dealt with in a policy, on a policy basis. So the result of that you see in this map that was part of the study, and it set out the criteria for identifying which of those buildings were what I call keepers, ones that you want to keep. And the study referred to them as heritage buildings. In some heritage conservation districts, they refer to them as contributory buildings. So they're contributing to the character of the district. But think of them just as keepers. They're ones that you want to make sure are kept. And as you'll see, not every building was colored in that pink color. Not every building merited retention. But nevertheless, they still were within that heritage conservation district that was being recommended, because the majority certainly were. And this is an example of the property inventory that was done for each property within that Heritage Conservation District study. So it went through some, you know, very simple things like the municipal address, the assessment roll number, the short legal description, into the construction, when it was built, whether there was an architect or a builder involved, what the architectural style is, the massing, and all those other criteria that I mentioned, the massing, the roof shape, the predominant construction material. You'll see in the second page of the inventory that's been reproduced, the center one, there's an older photograph of the building that we were able to find. Actually, just shortly after the building was constructed, we were able to find this for a number of buildings so that we could see what's the extent of the alteration. And certainly when you compare the upper photograph with the lower photograph, this building has considerable heritage integrity. There haven't been a great many changes made, as was typical of most of the buildings within the district. It did talk about alterations to the building, but we also got into landscaping features. You know, how far is it set back? What sort of trees are used? Is there fencing? How did you deal with vehicle parking? What sort of accessory buildings? Did they have garages? Where were the garages located? And we dealt with the integrity of the building, the heritage integrity, and as I mentioned, this particular building has a very high level of heritage integrity. And then there was an overall evaluation of that building, and this is an explanation of why this building is a keeper. And fortunately, there were insurance plans for the area, so we could see this particular property almost from initial construction on the insurance plans. So that's the property inventory that was done for the Heritage Conservation District study area in this Monroe Park. That was the built part. We also examined the landscape character, because keep in mind, a Heritage Conservation District deals not only with buildings, but it can deal with landscape features. And here there were a number of them, including the topography. There was a gentle slope down to Lake Ontario, which you can see on the photograph to the left. There was also a ravine to the left of the Heritage Conservation that defined the east, almost the east boundary of it. There was a bluff down to Lake Ontario. So you could look down this street, and there's the bluff and the beach along Lake Ontario. So it dealt with that broader aspect, but it also looked at front yards, the street, the width of the street, and as you can see, street trees are an important feature of this particular street, and there is a canopy that covers the street, an important defining feature of this Heritage Conservation District. Even the sidewalks, the width of the sidewalks, how you dealt with parking in the area, and finally what views. And in the district plan, this view down the street was defined as being an important view. You could look down the street and see the lake. That view shouldn't be blocked. So those sorts of things were coming out from the study. It confirmed the boundary as is required by the Ontario Heritage Act. And just as an explanation, there's Queen Street at the top. This is Lake Ontario at the bottom. So it didn't include the commercial properties along Queen Street. They were a different character than the residential area directly in behind. And we are also asked by the Ontario Heritage Act, okay, are there any changes required in order to maintain the heritage character, any changes to the city's official plan or other bylaws? And I examined the official plan, no changes required, it supported the character of this area. However, the zoning bylaw did need to be changed because it was extremely difficult to maintain verandas under the bylaw, and yet covered verandas were a defining feature of this heritage area. So that's the study that was done. The plan deals with the district character, so there's it deals with the plan objectives. It has policies for heritage buildings, non-heritage buildings, new buildings that could potentially be built in the area, and the landscape character. And finally, as required by the Ontario Heritage Act, it deals with exceptions, you know, when you don't have to get a heritage permit when you make changes to your building. And this is an important thing that needs to be explained to residents, because when you go out to the community to try and sell a heritage conservation district, they're going to say, well, if I change the paint color in my front of my building, do I need to get a heritage permit? If I have to re-shingle my roof, do I need to get a heritage permit? So these are the sorts of things you need to explain, and in both of those cases, repainting, we said no, because you can accept don't paint bricks, and changing, you know, re-shingling your house, the roof of your house, no problem, unless you're going to change the material. So you're moving from asphalt shingles to a metal roof. That is one thing that does require a permit, but certainly if you're going to change asphalt shingles, put a new layer on, different color, it didn't require a heritage permit. So those are the sorts of exceptions that you mentioned. So let's look at it in a little bit more detail, what the plan contains. In the district character statement, this was a maximum of 1 page describing the physical, the built, and landscape character of the district and its evolution. So it's something that's very brief, it hits on the high points, but it sets out why this area is a heritage district. And the unity of theme in terms of development was an important point here. The fact that it had been an amusement park and then was opened up to development, and the development occurred within the first quarter. Most of the development occurred within the first quarter of the 20th century. The objectives of the Heritage Conservation District Plan: retain heritage buildings. So that map I showed you with the buildings colored in pink, which I defined as keepers, one of the objectives is to retain those. Another objective is to manage change to buildings, whether they're keepers or ones that you're not going to keep. You still have to manage change to them. Another objective that we saw in this plan was if you're going to put additions on the building, and we recognize that some, to accommodate modern living standards, maybe you need more space, additions should be directed to the rear. New buildings, there's a possibility of new buildings in the area, but they should be in keeping with the character of the area. And interestingly enough, this is a difficult selling point with some communities. They want new buildings to look like old buildings. And as a heritage consultant, I'm often saying to them, no, new buildings should be of their time, so you don't confuse the public when they're walking down the street and they start to wonder, well, is that really an old building when in fact it was built last year? So my point is always they should be of their time, but they should be done in such a way that they are maintain the character of the area, such as height, building materials, the relationships of window openings to solid walls in the front of the building. So the plan deals with new buildings, and the plan also has landscape objectives for the beach, for the streets, and the front yards. Let's look a little bit in a bit more detail of what sort of policies you might develop for heritage buildings within the Heritage Conservation District. Alterations. So we said on the visible sides of the building, alterations should be in keeping with the character of the building. The important point about repair rather than replace. If you can't repair, then replace in kind. So those sorts of things. And we said the visible side. So we said the rear of your buildings is something we're not going to define, we're not going to manage the change to. You can do whatever you want in the rear of the building. So we made a conscious effort to say the important point is what you can see from the street. And again, additions, as I mentioned, put them to the rear no higher than the existing roof ridge, and on sides of buildings with exceptions. And demolitions, no for heritage buildings. For non-heritage buildings, I mean, they're there. They could exist for many years to come. So we've said, again, alterations to those on the visible sides of the buildings should be in keeping with the architectural character of the buildings and the district. Additions, same thing, to the rear. Demolition, yes, you can have demolition to your building, but only if you've submitted plans for the new building and the new building complies with the character of the district. And then there are policies for new buildings. It must conform to the district character in terms of height, setback, massing, use of materials, architectural style, roof type, and relationship to solids to voids. And here is the point about not introducing architectural styles that are not part of the district. If Second Empire style buildings were not part of the character, the new building should not attempt to reproduce Second Empire style building. And as I said, you shouldn't try and create fake old buildings. There are also policies for landscaping, and on the residential properties, we're not saying what trees you can plant, but it is, maintain soft landscaping in the front yard. Soft meaning grass, gardens, that soft landscaping. Limit how much of the front yard can be driveway and parking pads. Front yard fencing, in this case, it was not part of the character of the area, So no to front yard fencing. And trees, yes, we encourage planting of trees, and there was a long list of trees that you could potentially plant. In the public areas, street trees, and it's interesting, those trees that you saw in that photograph along the street, they're actually city-owned trees in most cases. So you want to maintain that, retain and develop more of it to create that canopy. We had looked at street width and sidewalk widths, maintain. One of the streets was wider than the other one because a streetcar had come down that street and used that street as a turnaround. In fact, you could still see the rails from that turnaround, which had been abandoned. But we said maintain that width, maintain the views that you get, and maintain the beach. So, you know, that was landscaping in the public areas. Implementation of a Heritage Conservation District plan. This is standard. We set out that you require a heritage permit to make alterations that may affect the heritage attributes of the properties, but you don't require them if they are minor as defined in the list that's part of the plan. Changes that conform to the plan may be approved by staff. This is another important point when you're trying to sell a Heritage Conservation District to a community. The response you often get is, this is going to add to the time that's required for me to get approval. And if your council has delegated approval for Heritage Conservation Districts to staff, and the alterations conform to what is set out in the plan, they can be approved very quickly, within a matter of days, by staff. However, we did specify in the plan that council has approval is required for any demolitions within the district, any new buildings, and any alterations or additions that don't conform to the plan. So that's when you get council involved. It can take, you know, from 3 to 6 months to get approval for that, and in a way that is an incentive for the owner to do work that conforms to the plan. The effect of a Heritage Conservation District. So you've got your Heritage Conservation District in place. It's been adopted by council. You've got your Heritage Conservation District plan. And the Ontario Heritage Act is quite clear. No owner of a property situated in a Heritage Conservation District may do any of the following unless the owner obtains a permit from the municipality to do so. Alter or permit the alteration of any property other than the interior. So keep in mind, interiors cannot be dealt with by Heritage Conservation Districts. So that's another selling point to the community. Heritage Conservation Districts don't deal with interiors of any structure or building on the property. So you can't alter, or you can't erect, demolish, or remove any building or structure, or permit such alteration or erection, demolition, or removal except if you have a permit. So the Ontario Heritage Act is quite clear. And again, for property owners, it's limited to the exterior. Change is possible. It's subject to council permission, although, as mentioned, council may have delegated its approvals to staff for some approvals, those that conform to the plan. Council may require information in support of a permit application. So you may have to submit drawings that show what you want to do, maybe photographs of the existing building. That's something that you should look at. You know, what are the information requirements, and that should be defined in the plan. And under the Heritage Act, council must decide within 90 days of issuing a notice of receipt of a complete application, or if it doesn't decide within 90 days, it's deemed to be approved. and the decision of council is appealable to the Ontario Municipal Board. The effect of a heritage conservation district for the municipality. So the municipality, as you saw with Monroe Park, is a property owner. It owns the streets. It owns the street trees. And the Ontario Heritage Act says under 41.2 sub 1, despite any other general act, if a heritage conservation district is in effect in a municipality, the council of the municipality shall not carry out any work in the district that is contrary to the objectives of the plan or pass any bylaw for the purpose that is contrary to the objective of the plan. And to further clarify that, if you look at subsection 2, in the event of a conflict between a heritage conservation district plan and a municipal bylaw that affects the designated district, the plan, so the heritage conservation district plan, prevails to the extent that of the conflict, but in all other respects the bylaw remains in full force. So a heritage conservation district plan can trump a zoning bylaw, and that is an important point. And a zoning bylaw that already exists, a zoning bylaw that is about to be passed, it has to comply with the plan, as you see in sub 1. So that is important, and that's something that the communities have grabbed on to as an important reason for getting Heritage Conservation District Plan in their area. So another effect of an HCD, so we dealt with properties that are designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act in the last webinar. So that's individual properties. So within a Heritage Conservation District, an individual property may be designated under Part 4. If it is designated and the interior is mentioned, then the interior would be governed by the Part 4 designation. But the exterior alterations and demolition would be subject to the Part 5 plan. So in the past, prior to 2005, you had to go through this onerous process. If you had a Part 4 designation and you came out with a Heritage Conservation District, a Part 5, you had to de-designate all the Part 4 designations within the district. You don't have to do that anymore. They remain in place. They can deal with interiors, Part 4 only, can deal with interiors, but in all other respects, the Heritage Conservation District Plan manages changes to those properties, even though they're designated, the exterior of those properties, even though they're Part 4. Another effect, and again, this is something that you should, if you're attempting to sell it to a community, and I know that is something that heritage people don't like to say they're doing, but you're actually selling the idea of this to the community. If you're not going to propose any changes and you're a property owner, the Heritage Conservation District Plan has no impact on you. It does not require that you restore your building. It's only when you're coming to make changes to the exterior of the building. Again, with Monroe Park, it's the exterior that is visible from the street. Then you would do it in conformity with the plan, but it doesn't necessarily say you have to restore it back to what it was, but you have to do it in a way which is sympathetic to the character of the area. And another thing, on the interior, a Heritage Conservation District Plan does not govern interior changes. Effective Heritage Conservation District, property values. This is something that comes up again and again when you're out trying to sell heritage conservation districts to communities. This is going to adversely affect my property values. Well, the University of Waterloo did a study in 2009 of heritage conservation districts, a number of them, and you see them listed at the bottom of this chart, and it looked at the sale of properties. And the line, the zero line, is below average. The everything above in blue or pink is above average. So you can see that in most cases, properties were selling for above average values or average values. So in very limited instances did it have an adverse impact. And thinking about it, a heritage conservation district plan, where it is brought in, where it is supported by the community, that community has an interest in maintaining the value of their area. It becomes a desirable area to live in. So I know in Cabbagetown, certainly the price of housing there did not go down, it went up. So what's the process to designate? The details are set out in the Ontario Heritage Act. I've mentioned some of them. I'm going to limit my discussion to the Heritage Conservation District Plan. Is it a planning study? I'm going to talk about public consultation, appeals, and then whether this is a top-down or a bottom-up process. When the Ontario Heritage Act was first brought in 1975, there was the attitude out there that we heritage professionals know best, and these areas that we love dearly should be heritage conservation districts. That sort of approach and that sort of attitude resulted in lengthy, onerous, and sometimes failures in getting heritage conservation district. So the second heritage conservation district in the City of Toronto was Witchwood Park, an artist community from the late 19th, early 20th century. Witchwood Park took close to a decade to go from initial discussions through to a plan in place, because it was this sort of approach that we are professionals, we know what's best. We think your area should be a heritage conservation district. In contrast to that, when communities are made aware of the value of heritage conservation district, residents support it. And okay, most support it, and they want it in place to the point where communities band together and pay for a consultant to do the study. And they wanted it. Those were successful ones. So it's from the bottom up. So I think as a heritage professional, you have to go out and sell the concept to the community, get them on side, and then start the process. So just to touch on those points, Heritage Conservation District Study and Plan. Is it a planning study? It's not specified in the Ontario Heritage Act. But in my opinion, it is very much a planning study. You saw the breadth and scope that it's dealing with. It's buildings, it's landscape, it's public spaces, it's public furniture. But it's a planning study that has a strong cultural and architectural and landscape bent, very strong. So at some point, if you're a member of a heritage committee, Municipal Heritage Committee, the planning department is going to get involved. Get them involved from the starting point. make them part of the public consultation. Maybe they'll even be the ones directing the study. But it's important that they be involved early in the process, early in the concept of a plan, because, as I say, they may be the agency that takes management by the municipality of the development of that plan, but they also have to look at it, okay, how is this affecting other planning documents in the municipality? Get the department public consultation. In Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, it requires public consultation before adopting the bylaw and plan. So under the Act, you have to make the information plan available to the public. You must hold one public meeting, and you must consult with the Municipal Heritage Committee. So that's the extent of public consultation under the Ontario Heritage Act. One public meeting. After the plan is adopted, you serve notice on the property owners, so a notice will go out by mail and it's published in the local newspaper. That's the extent of public consultation under the Act. My recommendation is you go for much more. You get the public involved, particularly even before you start doing a study and a plan. Go out to the community, see whether there is support for it, explain how it's been done in other communities, and then as you do the study and plan, take it back to the residents. Say, these are the policies we're thinking of. What's your reaction? How do you deal with this? You know, and it gives you an opportunity to gauge if there's a consensus. But also be aware there are going to be some people you're not going to convince. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you're just not going to convince. So you should be aware, the ward councillor, your council, your municipal council should be aware, yes, there may be strong public support, but you're going to have some naysayers. Be prepared for that. And then after, as I say, after you prepared the draft plan, take it out to the public before you go to council so that they're aware of what is being taken to council. And then council will hold the one statutory public meeting that they have to hold under the Ontario Heritage Act. You should be aware that there's an appeal process. Within 30 days of designating a heritage conservation district, of publishing council's bylaw decision, anybody can appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board, and the Ontario Municipal Board can dismiss the appeal. It can allow the appeal in whole or part, so it can take out a property within a proposed heritage conservation district, or it can say, no, we squash the whole bylaw, the whole district. If that is unlikely if you have a good study backing up your bylaw and you've had a good public consultation process. The last thing it can do is it can order the municipality. So the OMB can act on its own, or it can order the municipality to make its municipal council, or order the municipal council to make changes to the designation. So there is an appeal process. If it is appealed, the bylaw only comes into force when all appeals have been withdrawn or dismissed, or on the date the OMB amends the bylaw, or on the date that council has amended the bylaw following an order from the Ontario Municipal Board. So this is different from a Part 4 designation, an individual property designation. A Part 4 designation where council expresses its intent to designate. That designation by law is in force, subject to the appeal to the Conservation Review Board, as soon as council expresses its intent. In a Part 5 case, even though Council may have adopted the bylaw, it doesn't come into force or effect until after all the appeals to the bylaw have been dealt with. Before I deal with heritage conservation districts and zoning bylaws, I had mentioned about advisory committees, yes or no. And an advisory committee could be a committee established as a result of the Heritage Conservation District Plan, or it could be the Municipal Heritage Committee if your municipality is a small committee. And the in the case of Cabbagetown, one of the ones that I dealt with in the City of Toronto, there was an advisory committee set up that would review applications for alterations, demolitions, or new construction in concert with the staff review. So there was this process set up that allowed local input into the proposed with it was I circulated it to the advisory committee. Circulated it to the advisory committee by email and said, get back to me within 5 days of whether you have a concern or not. So that's one way of involving the public through an advisory committee after a plan is in place. The Municipal Heritage Committee could be that advisory committee, but keep in mind they have to respond quickly to proposals that are put forward. Or in some cases, a community could say, no, we don't want a local committee. And this happened in the Yorkville Heritage Conservation District area in the City of Toronto. I said, do you want a Municipal Heritage Committee? And the response was, we don't want our neighbors knowing what we're doing. So, you know, it's up to the community, I think. I think it's a good thing. It allows for some input, but as I say, it's up to the community. It's up to you whether or not you have a specific advisory committee on your heritage conservation district. Lastly, I'd like to deal with heritage conservation districts and zoning, because this is an issue that comes up from the public. Whenever you go out and try to sell this to the public, they'll say, well, we've already got a zoning bylaw in place. Why do we need a heritage conservation district? So some of the major concepts about a zoning bylaw, it outlines a building envelope. So it's basically the exterior walls, how far you can build to, how high you can build to. But it doesn't deal with what the building looks like. So there's no architectural detail. There's no definition of types of materials that can be used. There's no definition of window shape, that sort of thing. It deals with uses that go on in those buildings. It can be varied, so a zoning bylaw can be varied by the Committee of Adjustment, and the decisions of the Committee of Adjustment are appealable to the Ontario Municipal Board, and it does not deal with demolition. So you can have a zoning bylaw in place, you can submit a demolition application under the building code, the zoning bylaw is silent. It does not deal with demolition. It cannot deal with demolition. So that's zoning. A heritage conservation district, when it's in place and the plan is in place, it deals with architectural detail. So you can define the predominant type of building materials you want to see. You can define whether or not verandas should be on the front. You can define the relationship of the size of window openings to the size of the walls. So you can get into those sorts of architectural details which are the ones that you see in your community. However, the Heritage Conservation District Plan does not deal with the use. This was brought out to me when I was dealing with Cabbagetown, when a Tim Hortons wanted to go into a heritage building on Parliament Street, and I had to say to them, they wanted an upscale restaurant in there, and I said, the Heritage District, Heritage Designation does not deal with use. It deals with architectural details. We can deal with that. We can't deal with use. The community didn't like that answer, but at the end of the day, they were happy because the Tim Hortons that went in there was required to conform to the designation of the property. So they have a tin ceiling in there. They restored windows. The community is now happy with that, even though they could not control the use. What we could deal with was architectural detail. A Heritage Conservation District, the requirements can be varied by council. They can be enforced by council, but as discussed earlier, there can be an appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board. Heritage Conservation Districts deal with demolition. And in fact, you can say, even though it's a non-heritage building, you can say no demolition can occur until we have a plan for the new building and we're satisfied that the plan for the new building fits into the character of the community. You can make that requirement and then you can say, all right, it's not a heritage building, we'll allow demolition. And finally, as mentioned earlier, Heritage Conservation Districts trump zoning bylaw. So if a zoning bylaw allows a 6-story building within the area and the Heritage Conservation District says the maximum building height must be, 2.5 stories, that's what takes effect, not the zoning bylaw, but the Heritage Conservation District. Important points, important in maintaining the character of the area. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Additional resources like the 2 previous webinars. There is another publication from the Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. You can find it on their website. It deals with some of the things that I've talked about. It won't give you my personal recommendations and that sort of thing, but it does deal with the basic outlines for heritage conservation districts. The other thing is, go on to municipal websites. As I mentioned, there are more than 100 heritage conservation districts in force. Most of those heritage conservation district plans and studies are on the municipal websites. You can see what they look like. Please focus on those that were approved after 2005 because they're following the new requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act. So make sure it's from the last decade, but they're all over the place. You can look at them in detail and keep in mind that you can tailor the plans and the studies to your community. To understand how other municipal heritage committees are using Part 5 designation, I encourage you to join us at Community Heritage Ontario. I'd also ask when you're completing your survey form, if you could, for this webinar, if you could add whether or not you'd like another webinar, if you've got another topic that you'd like to pursue. Certainly it's something that we can take a look at, and maybe it would be of benefit to others in the province, and we'll put together a webinar. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to Heather for any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Wayne. That was wonderful. So I'm aware that we're just getting a little pressed for time, so I'll be pretty quick. So we are going to take questions now. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat space provided, and then it'll send it directly to me and I can read them out. So I'll just pull up our first one. So this question is from Kim Goodman, and she asks, what is the procedure if residents in a heritage conservation district do not consent? Furthermore, how does this affect residents who do not consent in terms of restrictions by the zoning bylaw?
Well, if a heritage conservation district plan and bylaw is in place, then every property within that district is subject to the policies of the whether or not they consented in the first place. It becomes irrelevant once the plan is in place. If they don't consent at the start, so if a majority of the community don't want a Heritage Conservation District plan, then it's up to your municipal council to decide whether or not they want to proceed in light of the objections to it. A municipal council can decide not to proceed. As an example, in the Kingsway community in formerly in Etobicoke in the city of Toronto, there was a Heritage Conservation District study and process. The community was divided down the middle. Half of them did not want, and they were extremely vocal, and half of them did want. It was up to municipal council and the ward politician. They decided not to proceed. We as staff said, we're fine with that because we got lots of other areas that want this, and we'll spend our time on them. But that's the process.
Okay, so don't forget to send in questions. We can take a couple more. So the next one I have is how much time would you recommend that a municipality set aside for HCD study and plan? Is there, is it a year for everyone, or does it depend on the individual municipality?
It really depends on the individual municipality and the size of the district that you're looking at and the extent of public consultation. To give you an example, in Cabbagetown South, the one that I showed you the bylaw for, we as staff put the plan together in about 3 months' time. We had one public consultation meeting, not a statutory one, but one where we went out to the public and said, here's the plan, what do you think? And they said, why haven't you designated us already? So that was another month or two to organize that. We went back and sent it on to the Municipal Heritage Committee. We then went to the local council and then up to the full council. That was done in about 10 months from start to end. Other districts where you've got a public that want to be involved, they want to see everything that's going on, you could be involved in 3 or 4 public meetings before you actually get to your Municipal Heritage Committee. So it could be a year and a half, could be 2 years. So it really varies depending upon the community, the size of the area, the response of the community, and the level of detail that you have to get. Many of these districts, a lot of the legwork has already been done. Properties have been researched for heritage value. You can pull the study together very quickly. So, as I say, it depends on the individual area.
Okay, thank you. So we've got time, I think, for one more question, and this is from Jeremy Rand. He asks, given the hierarchy of government jurisdictions, are federal properties within an HCD covered by the municipal bylaws?
The simple answer is no, they're not. But as I said, with individual property designations, Part 4, they're not covered by Part 4 designations. But this is my personal recommendation, so it's not an official recommendation. Do it anyways. See what happens. And to give you an example, the post office in Newmarket, we designated while it was still owned by the federal government. They didn't object. The designation bylaw was in place, and then the federal government declared it surplus. It was sold to a private individual. As soon as it was sold to that private individual, the bylaw, which was in place, took effect. So, all I can say is, go and do it. See what the reaction is, but keep in mind you cannot force the federal government to make changes. They are a superior government. I use that in quotation marks, a superior government, and therefore are not controlled by the provincial government, as is provincial properties, or as are provincial properties. They're not controlled by a municipal heritage designation.
Okay, and our very last question is from Susan McEwen, and she asks, if a smaller but unique heritage area exists within a larger heritage conservation study, is it still valuable to designate that area as an HCD?
Yes, I mean, a Heritage Conservation District study, you go through the study process, you see what are the areas, and you may adjust the boundaries. In the case of when I did Yorkville in the City of Toronto, the community said, well, there are these two other streets that we think have heritage value. We looked at them and said, yes. We added them to the study and included them, and so the final Heritage Conservation District was larger than the initial study. You could go the reverse, and if there is a small area within the study area and you've got a consensus from the people in that study area that there should be a Heritage Conservation District, but you've got problems dealing with the larger area, there is nothing to stop you meaning the municipal council, from designating that smaller area as a Heritage Conservation District. The study would cover a much larger area, but the actual designation bylaw and the plan would just apply to that area that is designated.
Okay, thank you so much for all your questions, everyone.